Hello YouTube, my name is Tyler. This is a little bit of a rating review type video. I finished 2 books in the last week-ish that I wanted to talk about. Neither of these books are technically books that were on my blind TBR. They are books that I borrowed from the library, but both of them I really enjoyed, and I just wanted to share that with anybody who happens to stumble upon this video. So I'll start with the book that I finished most recently, but also just rated slightly less than the other book. So this book is Native Son by Richard Wright. It was published in the 1940s. It is about a man named Bigger Thomas, and he lives in, the south side of Chicago. He lives in a 1-room apartment with his mom, sister, and brother. And at the start of the novel, we learn that he is going to work for a rich white family in a different part of Chicago. I'm not like super versed in Chicago's geography, but it takes place in the 1930s, between the wars. They are very poor, they're struggling, there's a lot of racism, a lot of strife. He ends up charged with murder and raping of a white woman. And as you can imagine, as a black man in Chicago in 1930s America, it's really intense. And it's split into 3 books. So the first book is like just a little bit like leading up to him getting this job, and then it ends with him committing the crime. The second book is kind of how he is trying to get away with it, and ends with him getting caught. And then the third book is his going through the criminal justice system and what happens to him. So it's a lot of like court, like lawyers talking to the judge and stuff in that third book. And it just, I've talked about, I really enjoy a book where I can like really get into a character's thoughts, and you are definitely in Bigger's world, mental world, through this whole book. It's pretty long. It was like 430 pages. It's pretty long, and sometimes it definitely like kind of meandered into like very philosophical thoughts. Sometimes like parts seem just to go on way too long. Like especially in the court parts, there was just like a long going on by his lawyer trying to do his closing remarks, and it was just pages and pages and pages of his lawyer talking, and like to a point I understood like they were it being realistic and like trying to give a full defense of his client, Bigger, but also like it did kind of feel like, come on, let's get to the point. Let's go. And you know, that's probably maybe a little bit more of a modern sensibility upon reading this. But speaking of a modern sensibility, it really was wild to me, because at points I would be like, they're really driving home like the racism, sometimes like the racist commentary that was put in here by like the white people who are controlling Bigger's life. I would just be like, oh wow, that's so over the top, that's so dramatic, we get it, like we don't need to be so like dramatic about it. But then I remember like this was written like in the 30s, and like it's not over the top trying to drive home a point necessarily. Like this was actually probably very realistic to the moment, and so it was crazy how like modern and easy it felt to read, that you would like forget that this was taking place almost 100 years ago, which is just like wild when you think about it. I just really enjoyed it. I gave it 4.5, so it's rounded up to a 5. I'm perfectly happy giving it a 5 on Goodreads. Just that half point for some of the like longer diatribes, like it got very easy to kind of like zone out and drift out, and then you realize you haven't paid attention for the last page, because it's just like Bigger thinking about things. But overall, I just like really enjoyed it. The look at like trying to take like any control over your life. I feel like that's like so much of what Bear's story is like he makes bad decisions because it's like the only control that he has in a life that is dominated by racism and white people telling him what he can and can't do. And so it results in him making very bad decisions, like really terrible, awful decisions. And like sometimes you can understand that, like in terms of like the racism that he faces, but then sometimes like there's like this misogynistic tone to it that like made me uncomfortable, but also was like forcing me to try and understand like where he was coming from in a way. Not that I agree with it, obviously, but like it just was very, I don't know, it was just a very interesting read, and it took me a very long time to read it. But I'm glad I took my time with it. I enjoyed it. I definitely recommend it. I definitely think it's a read that people who like, who have like enjoyed Toni Morrison's kind of stuff and like reads in that kind of literary fiction world would probably like. It also has like kind of a true crimey element to it, even though it is fiction, but like the way that the murder is covered, the like court procedural aspect in the last third, like there, it feels kind of like the beginning of like crime fiction almost, like true crime fiction. It was just a very interesting and what's the word I'm looking for? Like enlightening reading experience, I feel like. So the other book I read and just absolutely loved was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. This is a book that people have talked about, raved about for years. It is a memoir slash like scientific slash indigenous plant book. And it just like, I don't know, something about it was just like, this doesn't seem like my cup of tea. I'm not like a gardener or anything like that. But I have had more of an interest in native plants recently. And I've been trying to read indigenous authors. So I finally just put it on because I needed something to listen to. And holy cow, this is a perfect book. The first chapter made me cry. It immediately went onto my list of like life-changing books. Books that change the way my brain works. So along with How to Keep House While Drowning and The Dawn of Everything, Braiding Sweetgrass goes on that list. Just changed my understanding of the world we live in, how to exist in this world, like what the natural world means, how we should like interact with the natural world. So like the main thesis is like building a culture of reciprocity, gratitude, and there's a third element that I have lost. I think I mentioned it in my review. Hold on. Responsibility. I was like, I know there's another R. Responsibility, reciprocity, and gratitude. So these are the elements that her stories keep coming back to. So you're learning about plants and the lands that she is native to, like her culture. Her family like history like is connected to certain lands, but also places she has lived, and she has learned about the native plants that live there. She is a botanist, so she has this like scientific knowledge, but then she has what is called like indigenous wisdom, and how she braids them together. And it just like really, it was just profound, and I cannot recommend it enough. And like So I've been working on a native flower bed in my front yard, and I've been tearing out the turf. And in the book she talks about how like you need to ask for permission to do these things, and like pay attention to if you're being given permission to take. And so I just find myself like when I'm in the garden tearing out stuff, I'm like, thank you for letting me do this so I can do native seeds, or like paying attention. And if I start noticing I'm like digging up a lot of worms or finding a lot of bugs, I've started taking that as a sign to like stop, like this area is being used right now, come back tomorrow. And talking about how like a lot of plants don't actually thrive without purposeful human interaction. Not taking everything, but taking some. So like the sweetgrass thrives when less than half of it is being taken, because like native tribes like turn it into baskets and all sorts of things. And they find that the sweetgrass patches that are actively being used for basket making thrive and perform is not the word I'm looking for, but that's all that's coming to my head. Perform better than areas that are not being tended to and kept. And it was just a beautiful book. She's a wonderful writer. She also is a bit of like a poet. I think she thought about going into like poetry, I think, before she became a botanist. And the language is beautiful. The stories are beautiful. She imparts so much like of her like native wisdom and like stories she shares with like the wider world. And man, it was just a beautiful book. It was just such a wonderful experience. And I also read this very slowly. A lot of times I just like had to stop after an hour or two and just like absorb the knowledge. I'm just so grateful that I read it. I'm so grateful she wrote it and shared it with like the wider world. I'm so grateful that it has like changed my perspective on humans' responsibility to the world, because she talks about how, you know, settler culture has recognized that we have created damage on Turtle Island. But instead of working to fix it necessarily, the settler mentality is more so to leave areas pristine and not touch them. And so she tries to get across a message of like, not only do we need to like protect places, but we also need to actively fix places, and we need to engage with places. Like, those pristine places won't stay pristine if people aren't actively tending and caring for, loving those places. Anyways, it was a great book. I can't recommend it enough. I will probably end up buying a copy of it at some point. I know it was very popular, so I'm sure I will see it somewhere when I'm out and about, and I'll have to grab a copy because I just loved it so friggin' much. So anyways, those are two books I read recently and really enjoyed / loved. I will see y'all later. Bye.